body. In other words, they amplify each other's toxicity. It is easily possible to monitor the amount of metals removed with treatment. Removal of the metals is usually followed by dramatic improvements in pain, fatigue, depression, and many other symptoms, although not always and not in every patient. But prevention is always preferable to treatment. Germany, Denmark, Sweden, and Norway have all banned the use of amalgam fillings. If we are interested in keeping the costs of health care down, the FDA can institute a simple public health mandate right away, which will have profound cost-saving implications in the future for ourselves, our children, and many generations hence. Please ban the use of mercury amalgam fillings today. Thank you very much.
Dr. Claire Stagg.
Hello, everyone. You know, when our patients come to us as dentists, they always say, "Doc, I hate dentists. I really don't want to be here, and today I don't envy your job because I really feel for you." However, I'd like to share my journey. My journey is a little different than most of you. I'm a practicing dentist with an emphasis on mercury removal. I trained in France, and we were trained a little differently than Americans. We had a lot more of a natural way of learning a lot of homeopathy, a lot of alternative medicines that I grew up with that I thought were very natural. And we were told, and when we were, you know, in those days we had amalgams, we had the mercury, and we actually had to, they didn't have titrating machines, so we had to pour the mercury and use the drop cloths and see little beads of mercury fall down the floor. And they always said, "Don't touch that, that's not good for you, and it'll eat the gold on your rings, so don't wear your rings." And yet we still placed it in the patient's mouths. And so what happened is I came to America, I married an American, and a young man from church we found out was deathly ill and had been through a lot of different ways of trying to heal himself, and found out that he was mercury toxic. And it wasn't because of his mercury fillings, it was actually because he worked in the sign industry, and the ballast in the fluorescent lighting caused him to be sick. So that was very interesting, and I thought, well, heck, you know, if he's gotten sick with mercury with ballast, and we're putting it in patients' mouths, what does that mean that we're doing to our patients? And I stopped using mercury because I didn't want it in my mouth. But then the thing is that what do you do with it that's already inside the mouths? So there was a whole journey for me to learn how to take it out safely, safely for the patients, safely for myself, and for my staff. And that's when I went to the IOMT. The IOMT taught us that there's certain protocols that we can use that will be more careful and more safe to be able to remove the mercury. And at my first meeting, I heard of a doctor called Stephanie Cave. And Stephanie Cave talked about the children that she was finding back, that she was bringing back to life, literally, that had been lost to autism. And then that was a whole other explosion now, thimerosal and vaccines. I had a girlfriend, a friend I met in Grenada. She was in medical school in Grenada when I was working there back in the early 80s. And Julie was a staunch advocate. The American Academy of Pediatrics would never hurt our children. Nothing's wrong with the vaccines. Debated with her for several hours. And I said, you know what, Jules, that's your choice, that's your decision, but I think you should really look into it. And the reason I called her up to tell her about Stephanie Cave was that when we were building our green building, because we have one, a unique one, her kid kept rocking all the time at the table. I said, this isn't right, something's wrong with this child. And sure enough, the child was autistic. Julie had an incompatibility with the rhesus blood and was given Rogam while she was pregnant. And then within 4 weeks of her delivery, had 8 amalgam fillings. Needless to say, Danny was a severe autistic child. Interestingly enough, Julie is now a staunch advocate of autism children and has a foundation in Jacksonville called HEAL. Julie has written a book, and it's amazing to think that in less than 8 years, this woman has done 180 degrees in saving children's lives. People come from all over the country to see her. The FDA was founded, not the FDA, the ADA was founded in the 1830s because there was a problem with the masses not being able to have dentistry in an affordable manner. A lot of people have already said the facts. German fellows devised amalgams, 50% mercury, 35% silver, then the rest of copper, tin, or zinc. But what happened is nobody could afford gold, or not everybody could afford gold, or what was there at the time. And so amalgam was founded. And another person I thought spoke very well. I'm thinking that if the ADA actually does admit, the reason why the ADA was founded, because the association at the time did not agree with the use of mercury fillings. So the American Dental Association was founded then. So think of the logistic and legal nightmare that is going to happen if the ADA, that all us doctors are under the envelope of, have to admit that what they've been using or doing or advocating for the past nearly 2 centuries is a toxic material. It just blows your mind, and that's where I think you have a big problem to handle. I know I should finish talking, but one of the things that and my last little topic is that when we were pregnant, it was 11 years before I was able to get pregnant, and we had a wonderful birthing coach who was not very financially able, not that I was either at the time, but she said, could we have a party at your house to go ahead and celebrate all the other parents who had children? I said, sure. And our group, there were about 5 or 6 of us, and there were about total 20 parents, 20 sets of parents with children. And one of the biggest memories I'll always have of that party was that, yes, we had lots of happy families, but there was one that would break your heart. And it was a parent that had to hold their child because the child couldn't hold their head up because they lost it after the last set of vaccines. And the child was as limp as a noodle. And I know some of you are probably parents, and I'm sure you have fillings in your mouth and children. Try and do something. If anything today you take away with it is try to see if you can change it so that you can make sure that the children do become noodles also. Thank you.
Mr. Paul Funk, Florida Health Freedom Coalition.
My name is Paul Funk. I'm from Newport Richey, Florida. The good news is that I'm the second to the last speaker. The bad news is I'm here to talk about mercury. Okay, I got into this business to save myself. When I was about 40 years old, I had a bunch of fillings put in my mouth. My lower mouth only had one filling on each side. It went from the back to the front. I figured those teeth are going to last forever. They're never going to get used again. So I was doing fine. About 55, 60 years old, I started having neurological issues and health issues. And I started thinking to myself, well, this must be what getting old is like. So then one day I met this gal, and she says, well, you know, I had this problem called mercury toxicity. And mercury toxicity, I never heard of it, you know, where do you get that? And she showed me this picture of herself, and, you know, and she looked like she was dead. The only thing missing was the pine box. So she started talking about Hal Huggins and It's in Your Head. So I called him up, got the book, and started reading about it. And then I opened my mouth in front of the mirror, and I looked, and there's a lot of that gray, silvery stuff in there, you know. So then I worked on getting it out of my mouth, and then I worked on getting it out of my body, and I spent quite a bit of time and money on that trip, and I'm now 77 years old. And I feel a lot better than I did when I was 60 years old. So let's take high school science. There's something called the periodic table. There's 90 plus elements in the periodic table. One of them is radioactive uranium. According to the Journal of Toxicology, that's the most toxic element on planet Earth. According to the Journal of Toxicology, mercury is the second most toxic element on planet Earth. So you could say that mercury is the most toxic, non-radioactive element known to man on planet Earth, okay? Mercury is starting to move from a liquid to a gas at 10 degrees Fahrenheit. So we all know from our high school science, for every increase of 10 degrees centigrade in temperature, the pressure to vaporize doubles. So there it is, high school chemistry, don't you love it? So what happens when you heat up mercury? This is the story of a lady who heated up her mercury. She was having facial pains, and she had a treatment called diathermy. And what they do is they use microwave and sonic frequencies to do deep heating treatment and try to alleviate pain. And so that's going to heat up. She had 4 normal-sized mercury fillings in her mouth. And how much mercury is in a mercury filling? About the same amount that's in a mercury thermometer. Now, if you drop a mercury thermometer in the school and you break it, you close the school and you bring in some specialists to clean it up. Well, she has 4 mercury thermometers in her mouth, and this is what happened to her. At age 34, in 1984, Barbara had been extremely active and athletic all her life, playing a lot of sports and tennis. She had 4 mercury amalgam fillings at the time. At a doctor appointment, the officer was running a special on an electrowave diathermy treatment for pain or discomfort. She told them that she had some discomfort in the oral area, so it was agreed to do a diathermy for that area. And she was not told there might be a problem. After a period of time, her mouth started to feel very warm. She decided to summon the nurse. By the time the device was taken off, the area felt like there was a blowtorch applied to it. The sensation did not stop when the device was removed. She had severe facial pain, constant taste of metal in her mouth area, and developed chronic fatigue and many other adverse symptoms. In the period following the event, the metals from the amalgams had melted or separated and were extremely evident in her saliva. She described it as the metals were bubbling up in her saliva. She had many continuing symptoms as before, including her hands and arms felt red hot much of the time. She had many visits to doctors, dentists, but nothing was accomplished to diminish her health problems. The metals bubbling up in her saliva then began affecting her throat, stomach areas, many adverse effects of those areas over a significant period of time, as well as constant major pain in the oral area. She consulted the doctors, including the Mayo Clinic, about the pain and other issues, and was told that the trigeminal nerve damage and that her problems were due to the fact that the diathermy should not have been used in the oral area for a person with amalgams, and had separated the metals in her amalgam fillings, causing her major mercury and other toxic metal poisoning. Doctor at the Mayo Clinic who stated this opinion was Dr. Malkovich. She had provided Mayo Clinic with a 22-page history of symptoms, doctor and dental appointments history, etc. The constant pain and other symptoms required much treatment during the entire period, and she would advise and consulted the FDA about her problems. She saw Dr. Michael Siskin, a FDA, who was the person who wrote the FDA user effects manual on such devices regarding warnings and contraindications for the devices or treatments. Dr. Siskin agreed that the problem was caused by improperly using diathermia in an area with mercury fillings, and because of her consultation with Dr. Siskin, he agreed that devices such as diathermy should not be used in the oral area of some with amalgam fillings, and included that as a contraindication in the FDA manual on diathermy treatment. So something good came out of this very bad experience. After 6 months of the poisoning event, she went to her dentist and a regular cleaning appointment. During the cleaning, her symptoms and pain all got worse. She became paralyzed and lost the ability to walk. After more consultations with doctors, she did some researches and decided to have her amalgam fillings, which had suffered major damage, replaced. She also had to have oral surgery several times since there were lots of metal in the gums and oral area, mercury tattoos and such. After more research on what to do about the significant mercury and toxic metal poisoning, she decided to undergo metal detoxification, found a doctor with a good record using herbal detoxification, and began detoxifying. Most of her problems, other than this trigeminal nerve damage, pain, got better after the amalgam replacement and the surgery and detoxification. So this is a person who did get better, not return to her prior status. So that's a good thing. Now, what happens today? What loosens up mercury in your mouth? Well, you take electromagnetic force. You get a hair dryer. You're drying your hair. And there's a motor there, generates electromagnetic force. So now you got mercury filling hair. Stimulates the mercury.
Thank you, Mr. Funk. We need to move on.
Okay.
And our final speaker is Stuart Schechner.
Good morning. My name is Dr. Stuart Schechner. I'm a dentist. I am living proof that mercury exposure from any source is a critical health hazard. I'm a dentist with documented occupational mercury poisoning. From 1978, I sat over a large spill of mercury hidden in deep shag carpeting in my dental office. 6 years later, I was completely disabled to practice my profession. I lost my dental practice, my income, my marriage, and almost my life to this horrible, insidious poison. I went through years of torture with not one local physician having a clue. My neurologist did not even know that dentists use mercury. I contacted the American Dental Association for help. In response, Dr. Langen of the Council on Dental Therapeutics sent me a letter stating that I could not possibly have mercury poisoning. I had to fly across the country from Florida to the state of Washington to a doctor specializing in mercury toxicity. After a week of testing, the doctor's report stated that I was a classic case of mercury poisoning. I was referred to one of the leading world mercury toxicologists, Dr. Louis Chang, who validated my condition of mercury poisoning. The American Dental Association stated to me in writing that I could not possibly have mercury poisoning, in direct contradiction to a leading world toxicologist. The ADA uses the same criteria on the millions of people who have suffered from mercury poisoning from their mercury silver dental fillings. The ADA was wrong about me and also wrong about the millions of people who've had their health destroyed by this insidious poison in their dental fillings. It's okay to place these mercury fillings in a person's mouth, but once outside the mouth, it's deemed to be an environmental hazard by the Environmental Protection Agency. This is indeed a contradiction. In my reading about mercury, there was a connection with multiple sclerosis. I met Vivian Bennett, who told me her amazing story. She had MS for years, and her condition had been deteriorating. Her priest was over her home and sang last rites for her. She had a premonition that she needed to have her mercury fillings removed. Within a few weeks after her mercury fillings were removed, she was completely free of MS symptoms, never to have a recurrence. In collaboration with Dr. Michael McCann, a pediatric immunologist, we published a document in the Journal of Clinical Pharmacy. Essentially, we state that mercury, even in small amounts, can act as a trigger in autoimmune diseases such as multiple sclerosis and Graves' disease in genetically susceptible individuals. Due to great variation in susceptibility, every individual reacts differently to mercury exposure. This may range from no symptoms at all, to slight symptoms such as irritability and insomnia, to major illnesses such as MS, Parkinson's disease, and Alzheimer's. The science is very clear. Mercury is primary neurotoxic and secondarily immunotoxic. Mercury does leak out of mercury silver fillings. It does become deposited in tissues throughout the body. Maternal mercury does become deposited in the fetus where the developing brain is at high risk. While other countries such as Sweden, Denmark, and Norway have prohibited the use of mercury in dentistry, the United States lags behind. It is very clear that the continued use of mercury in dentistry is a health hazard to both dental personnel and dental patients. To coin a phrase from Professor Alfred Stock, head German chemist in 1926, the introduction of mercury fillings was a nasty sin against humanity. It is time for this archaic, extremely poisonous material to be prohibited from further use in dentistry. In conclusion, about 50 years ago, cigarette manufacturers were advertising in the Journal of the American Medical Association and leading American magazines. The headlines read, "More doctors smoke Camels than any other cigarette." In 50 years from now, will the use of mercury in dentistry, the most toxic, non-radioactive element known to man, be remembered the same way? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, at this time we'll take a break and we will meet back together at 10:30. At 10:30, and we'll have a Q&A session at that time.